Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon is not the one in someone's hand, but the assumption already made in someone else's mind. The flashing red and blue lights painted long streaks across the rain-soaked highway as a black SUV eased onto the shoulder just outside Fredericksburg, Virginia. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind where commuters hurried home without giving a second thought to the patrol car they passed a few miles earlier. Behind the wheel sat Danielle Brooks, a composed black woman in her early 40s whose hands rested calmly on the steering wheel exactly where they could be seen. Her phone, connected through the vehicle's speakers, carried the cheerful voice of her 16-year-old daughter, Maya, who was excitedly describing the history project she had just finished. Danielle smiled, promising she would be home in less than 30 minutes and reminding Maya to leave the porch light on because the rain was getting heavier. Before either of them could finish the conversation, a sharp beam from a police spotlight flooded the cabin, forcing Danielle to blink. "Sweetheart," she said in the same steady voice she had used through years of impossible situations, "I'm being pulled over. Stay on the line, but don't say anything unless I ask you to." On the other side of the highway, Officer Ryan Mercer stepped out of his cruiser, adjusting his duty belt as rain collected on the brim of his cap. He had already convinced himself this stop was different from the dozens he'd made that week. The expensive SUV, the unfamiliar license plate. The driver, he believed, looked nervous before he had even reached the window. Every observation fit neatly inside a conclusion he had reached long before introducing himself. Danielle lowered her driver's side window halfway and waited with both hands visible. She spoke first, her voice polite and measured. "Good evening, officer." Ryan barely acknowledged the greeting. His flashlight swept across the dashboard, the passenger seat, then paused on a dark equipment case resting behind the front seats. The reflection from its metal latch caught the beam for only a second, but it was enough for his posture to stiffen. Danielle noticed the change immediately. She had seen people mistake confidence for defiance before, calmness for concealment, silence for guilt. She also understood something many people never learned until it was too late. Fear could spread faster than facts. "License and registration," Ryan ordered. Danielle nodded once. "They're inside the glove compartment. I'll reach for them slowly." Instead of answering directly, Ryan barked another command. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Danielle froze exactly as instructed. A passing pickup truck splashed water across the shoulder while Maya whispered through the speakers, "Mom." Danielle ignored the question. Her eyes remained forward. "Officer," she said carefully, "I want to cooperate. Please give me one instruction at a time." Ryan's jaw tightened. To him, her calm explanation sounded less like cooperation and more like resistance. Rain tapped against the windshield in a slow rhythm as another cruiser appeared in the distance. The air seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. Danielle never raised her voice. She never argued. She simply waited, believing clarity would arrive before misunderstanding could take control. She had no idea that within moments, a single decision would change not only her own life, but the lives of everyone standing on that lonely stretch of Virginia highway. 23 minutes earlier, the highway had looked almost peaceful beneath the steady Virginia rain. Danielle Brooks drove with the relaxed confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime respecting both discipline and routine. The windshield wipers moved in perfect rhythm while soft jazz played quietly through the speakers. Folded carefully in the back seat rested a neatly pressed army dress uniform protected inside a garment bag, beside a triangular folded American flag that had been presented only an hour earlier during a memorial service for a fallen soldier. Danielle had stood before grieving parents, young recruits, and veterans whose hair had long since turned gray. She had spoken about courage, responsibility, and the promise that no service member would ever be forgotten. Even after years in uniform, those ceremonies never became easier. Every folded flag represented a family whose dinner table would never look the same again. As she merged onto Interstate 95, her thoughts remained with the widow she had hugged before leaving the ceremony. She quietly hoped the woman had made it home safely before the weather became worse. Her phone rang through the hands-free system and Maya's familiar voice immediately filled the vehicle with warmth that no storm could wash away. They laughed about homework, debated what movie they would watch that weekend, and argued playfully about whether Danielle would finally agree to let Maya choose the music during their next road trip. For several miles, the conversation sounded like any ordinary mother and daughter ending another ordinary day. Danielle reminded Maya to finish dinner, feed their golden retriever, and leave the porch light on because visibility was getting worse by the minute. As she spoke, another vehicle accelerated past her, spraying sheets of rain across the windshield before disappearing into the darkness. Danielle never chased it. Years of military leadership had taught her that arriving safely mattered far more than arriving first. Nearly 200 yards behind her, Officer Ryan Mercer noticed the black sport utility vehicle as it passed beneath a highway overpass. He watched it longer than he watched the speeding pickup truck that had flown through traffic only moments before. Something about Danielle's vehicle held his attention. Maybe it was the unfamiliar government parking decal in the corner of the windshield. Maybe it was the expensive model. Maybe it was simply the driver herself. Whatever the reason, he eased his cruiser into the lane behind her and stayed there. Inside his patrol car, Ryan replayed the criticism he had received earlier that afternoon. Captain Laura Mitchell had warned him once again about unnecessary traffic stops and reminded him that every interaction reflected on the entire department. Ryan had nodded politely inside her office, but the conversation continued echoing in his mind long after he left. He believed the department had become too cautious, too concerned with appearances, and too willing to question experienced officers. As the distance between the two vehicles slowly closed, Ryan convinced himself he had spotted a minor lane drift caused by the rain. That was all the justification he needed. He reached toward the control panel, activated the emergency lights, and watched their blue and red reflections ripple across the wet pavement ahead. Danielle glanced into her rearview mirror, took one slow breath, signaled carefully, and guided her vehicle onto the shoulder exactly as she had been taught to do many years before. Neither of them realized that this ordinary traffic stop had already become something much larger than either one could yet understand. The rain continued to fall with quiet determination, each drop tapping against the roof of Danielle Brooks's sport utility vehicle like the steady beat of a distant drum. She kept both hands exactly where Officer Ryan Mercer could see them, her breathing slow and controlled. Years of military service had taught her that remaining calm often gave other people the chance to do the same. Unfortunately, calmness only seemed to make Ryan more suspicious. His flashlight moved across the cabin once again, lingering on every ordinary object as though it might suddenly reveal something dangerous. The folded garment bag, the leather portfolio resting on the passenger seat, the insulated travel mug in the center console. Finally, the beam settled once more on the dark equipment case behind the front seats. Danielle knew what he was looking at. It contained ceremonial items she had transported after the memorial service, all carefully organized and documented. There was nothing unlawful about it, yet she also understood that explanations meant little if the person listening had already reached a conclusion. Ryan stepped closer to the driver's window without lowering the flashlight. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "A military memorial service," Danielle answered evenly. "I'm on my way home." Ryan studied her face for several seconds before speaking again. "Do you have anything inside the vehicle that I should know about?" Danielle answered with complete honesty. "There are ceremonial items in the rear compartment. My driver's license and registration are inside the glove compartment, exactly where I told you they are." Ryan's expression did not soften. Instead, he shifted his weight and glanced toward the back of the vehicle again. The silence between them grew heavier than the rain itself. Through the hands-free connection, Maya remained quiet exactly as her mother had instructed, but Danielle could hear the faint sound of her daughter's breathing. She imagined Maya sitting at the kitchen table, homework forgotten, listening to every word with growing concern. Danielle wished she could reassure her, yet she knew every unnecessary sentence could complicate the situation. "Officer," Danielle said with careful respect, "I would like to comply with your instructions. Please tell me exactly how you would like me to retrieve my identification. Ryan answered immediately. Do not move. Danielle nodded once. Understood. A few seconds passed before he spoke again. Get your license and registration. Danielle remained perfectly still. Sir, those are two different instructions. My documents are inside the glove compartment. I need your permission to reach for them. Ryan frowned, as though the clarification itself were an argument. Behind him, passing vehicles continued rolling through the rain, their headlights briefly illuminating the roadside before disappearing into the darkness. Nearly 100 yards away, Noah Reed had stopped beneath the awning of a convenience store while waiting for the storm to ease. From where he stood, he noticed the unusual length of the traffic stop. He was not close enough to hear the conversation, but something about the stillness caught his attention. Almost everyone expected arguments during roadside encounters. This one looked different. The driver never appeared agitated. She simply sat with remarkable composure while the officer paced cautiously beside the window. Noah instinctively lifted his phone, uncertain why he felt compelled to record, only knowing that sometimes ordinary moments became important later. Back beside the vehicle, Danielle slowly drew another steady breath. She had led soldiers through uncertainty before. She had faced impossible decisions where panic could cost lives. Yet sitting behind the steering wheel that evening, she realized one painful truth. Leadership could prepare a person for many challenges, but it could not guarantee that someone else would choose understanding over assumption. Imagine doing everything exactly as you were told, and still feeling that every correct decision might somehow become the wrong one. Danielle Brooks understood that feeling the moment the silence stretched longer than it should have. Officer Ryan Mercer stood just outside her window, rain dripping from the edge of his cap as his flashlight remained fixed inside the vehicle. Every few seconds, he shifted his attention between Danielle and the equipment case behind her seats, as though he expected it to explain a story he had already written in his own mind. Danielle refused to match his tension. She kept her shoulders relaxed, her hands visible, and her voice measured. Officer, I am waiting for your instructions. Ryan answered without looking at her. Take your right hand off the wheel. Danielle moved only her eyes toward the glove compartment. Is that where you want me to reach? Ryan immediately interrupted. Do not reach for anything until I tell you. Danielle slowly returned her hand to the steering wheel exactly as instructed. Several seconds passed before Ryan spoke again. Why are you hesitating? Danielle remained calm. Because I'm trying to follow every instruction you give me. The answer should have ended the confusion. Instead, it deepened it. Ryan interpreted her precision as defiance. Danielle viewed it as responsibility. Neither of them was having the same conversation anymore. Maya continued listening through the hands-free connection, barely breathing. She had never heard her mother's voice sound afraid, but she recognized something else inside it. Extraordinary patience. Danielle had used that same tone when teaching young officers during leadership seminars, reminding them that confidence never required raising one's voice. Tonight, that lesson was being tested in a way she had never expected. Across the highway, Noah Reed remained beneath the convenience store awning while rainwater streamed off the roof beside him. The longer he watched, the stranger the encounter appeared. There was no shouting, no sudden movement, no obvious argument. The driver stayed almost perfectly still while the officer continued, giving instructions that seemed to change every few moments. Noah quietly continued recording, telling himself that if nothing happened, he could simply erase the video later. Nearby, a store clerk glanced outside through the glass entrance before returning to stock shelves, assuming it was another routine traffic stop that would soon be over. Back on the shoulder, Ryan stepped closer until the beam of his flashlight reflected across the dashboard. His voice became firmer. Tell me exactly what is inside that case. Danielle answered truthfully. Ceremonial military equipment from today's memorial service. Ryan narrowed his eyes. Open it. Danielle looked directly at him for the first time since the stop began. I cannot safely do that without first retrieving my keys and documents, and I would like clear instructions before moving my hands. Her response was respectful direct, and completely free of emotion. Yet Ryan heard only another obstacle standing between himself and the control he believed he deserved. A second patrol vehicle appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the rain before slowing behind Ryan's cruiser. The younger officer inside remained seated, waiting for direction from his senior colleague. Danielle noticed the arrival in her mirror, but kept her eyes forward. Experience had taught her that additional people could either calm a situation or complicate it. Everything depended on the choices made during the next few minutes. The rain continued falling without judgment, washing over flashing lights, wet pavement, uniforms, and ordinary citizens alike. Nature treated every person exactly the same. Danielle quietly wished people found it just as easy to do the same. The moment everyone feared did not begin with panic. It began with uncertainty. Officer Ryan Mercer glanced once more at the glove compartment before looking directly at Danielle. "Brooks, slowly retrieve your registration," he said. Danielle answered immediately. "Yes, officer." I am moving my right hand toward the glove compartment exactly as instructed. Her words were deliberate, spoken one at a time, so there could be no misunderstanding. Her right hand left the steering wheel by only a few inches before Ryan suddenly raised his voice. "Stop moving." Danielle froze instantly. Her hand remained suspended in midair. Rainwater rolled down the driver's side window as the silence returned, heavier than before. "Officer," she said calmly, "my hand is stopped." Ryan took another cautious step backward, his flashlight trembling almost imperceptibly as its beam reflected across the polished surface of the dashboard. To Danielle, the situation no longer felt confusing. It felt dangerously inconsistent. Every instruction seemed to cancel the one before it. Every attempt to cooperate created another misunderstanding. Through the vehicle speakers came the faint sound of Maya whispering her mother's name, barely loud enough to hear. Danielle resisted every instinct to answer. She knew that introducing another voice into the encounter might only increase the confusion. Instead, she kept her eyes forward and waited. Behind Ryan, the second patrol vehicle had fully arrived. The younger officer remained near his cruiser, watching quietly while waiting for direction from the senior officer. He could see no raised voices, no sudden confrontation, only a woman sitting almost perfectly still beneath flashing emergency lights. The scene looked ordinary at first glance, yet something about Ryan's increasingly tense posture made him hesitate before stepping closer. Across the highway, Noah Reed continued recording from beneath the convenience store awning. He lowered his phone for a moment, wondering whether he was overreacting. Then he noticed Ryan pacing several steps away before returning to the driver's window again. It felt less like a routine traffic stop and more like two people trapped inside completely different versions of the same conversation. Danielle finally spoke again. "Officer, for everyone's safety, would you like another supervisor to respond? I'm willing to wait as long as necessary." The request was respectful. There was no challenge in her voice. She simply wanted one clear set of instructions from someone willing to slow the situation down. Ryan interpreted the request very differently. To him, asking for a supervisor suggested that his authority was being questioned. His expression hardened. "I'm giving the instructions here," he replied. Danielle nodded once. "Understood. Then please tell me exactly how you would like me to proceed." For several long seconds, nobody moved. The rain softened into a steady mist, while passing traffic continued, without noticing how fragile the atmosphere had become on the shoulder of the highway. Finally, Ryan spoke again. "Open the glove compartment." Danielle answered exactly as she had every previous command. "I will comply." She slowly turned her wrist toward the latch, announcing every movement before making it. As the compartment door eased open, a small metallic object inside briefly caught the reflection of Ryan's flashlight. The silver surface flashed for only an instant before disappearing back into shadow. Ryan's breathing changed. Danielle noticed it immediately. She had seen that look before in high-pressure situations, the instant when assumption threatened to move faster than observation. She remained perfectly still, hoping that patience would leave enough room for judgment to catch up with fear. Time has a strange way of slowing down when one decision carries the weight of every assumption made before it. Danielle Brooks did not move another inch. Her hand remained exactly where Officer Ryan Mercer had instructed it to be, hovering near the open glove compartment, while the silver object inside reflected one last faint glimmer beneath the patrol car lights. Her voice stayed calm despite the growing tension. "Officer, the object you see is not a weapon. My driver's license is directly beneath it. I will not touch anything unless you tell me to." Ryan did not answer immediately. The rain continued falling between them, blurring the edges of flashing blue and red lights until the entire highway seemed suspended inside a haze of uncertainty. The younger officer standing near the second cruiser shifted uneasily, sensing that something had changed even though he could not hear every word being exchanged. Noah Reed kept recording from across the road. His phone pointed steadily toward the traffic stop as passing vehicles sent sheets of water across the pavement. Danielle slowly lowered her eyes toward the open compartment without moving her head. Inside rested her registration, insurance card, and a polished military identification holder that had caught the flashlight for only an instant. Nothing about the contents posed a threat, yet she understood that facts alone could no longer calm the moment. "Officer," she said once more, "I am staying exactly where you instructed me to stay." Before another word could be exchanged, a sudden sharp report echoed across the rainy highway. Birds scattered from nearby trees. Passing drivers instinctively slowed their vehicles. Danielle immediately leaned back against her seat, remaining conscious but stunned by what had just happened. Her hands were still visible. The identification holder slipped from the edge of the open compartment and landed harmlessly on the floorboard with a soft metallic sound. Through the vehicle speakers came Maya's frightened voice calling for her mother again and again. Danielle answered quietly, her breathing controlled despite the confusion. "Maya, stay on the line." Ryan stared through the open window, his expression no longer filled with certainty but with disbelief. The flashlight beam drifted downward until it rested on the object lying near Danielle's feet. It was not a weapon. It was a military identification holder bearing the unmistakable seal of the United States Army. For a long second, nobody spoke. Even the younger officer behind, Ryan, remained frozen, trying to understand what had happened. Danielle slowly looked toward Ryan without anger in her eyes. There was only disappointment and remarkable composure. "Officer," she said gently, "please call Fort Belvoir. Tell them Colonel Danielle Brooks has been involved in an emergency." Ryan blinked as though he had not heard her correctly. The title sounded impossible completely, at odds with the assumptions he had formed only minutes earlier. He looked again at the identification holder, then back at Danielle, unable to reconcile the calm woman before him with the story he had already convinced himself was true. Somewhere in the distance, another set of emergency lights appeared through the rain, growing brighter with every passing second as the quiet highway prepared to witness a truth that could no longer remain hidden. The first voice to break the silence did not come from the highway. It came through the patrol radio. Unit 12 confirmed the status of the traffic stop. Ryan Mercer stared at the military identification holder resting on the floorboard, his mind struggling to reconcile the evidence before him with every assumption he had made only minutes earlier. Danielle Brooks remained remarkably composed despite the chaos surrounding her. Her breathing was measured, her words deliberate, and her attention shifted briefly toward the phone still connected through the vehicle speakers. "Maya," she said softly, "listen carefully. I need you to call Major Ethan Cole. His number is saved under emergency contact. Tell him exactly where I am. Do not leave the house. Help is coming." Her daughter answered through trembling breaths, promising she would make the call immediately before the connection ended. Ryan finally reached for his radio. His voice, once firm and confident, now carried unmistakable hesitation. "Dispatch, I need verification on an individual identifying herself as Colonel Danielle Brooks, United States Army." Several long seconds followed. Rain continued washing across the windshield while the younger officer stepped closer, his eyes moving between Danielle, the identification holder, and Ryan's expression. He said nothing. Experience told him this was no longer an ordinary roadside stop. Dispatch returned with a calm, professional voice. "Stand by for verification." Those few words seemed to last forever. Across the highway, Noah Reed never lowered his phone. He could not hear the radio traffic, but he noticed the sudden change in the officer's body language. The confidence that had defined the encounter only moments earlier had quietly disappeared. Nearby, the convenience store clerk finally stepped outside after hearing emergency vehicles approaching from a distance. More flashing lights reflected across the wet pavement, but these belonged to medical responders and supervisory units. Danielle closed her eyes for only a moment before opening them again. She looked toward the younger officer instead of Ryan. "Please make sure everyone stays calm," she said. "Nobody else needs to make a mistake tonight." The younger officer gave a small nod, surprised that the woman at the center of the incident seemed more concerned about preventing further confusion than assigning blame. Then the radio came alive once more. Unit 12, identity confirmed. Danielle Brooks is a United States Army colonel assigned to Fort Belvoir. Repeat, identity confirmed. Senior command has been notified. Maintain the scene. A supervisor is responding immediately. The words seemed to drain every remaining certainty from Ryan's face. He looked at Danielle again, then back toward the identification holder, realizing that the truth had been sitting only inches away from the beginning. Danielle met his eyes without triumph or anger. "Officer," she said quietly, "my rank does not change what should have happened here tonight. It only changes who receives the phone call." Before Ryan could respond, another transmission interrupted the silence. "All units. Captain Laura Mitchell is assuming command upon arrival." Almost at the same moment, another message reached dispatch from Fort Belvoir. Major Ethan Cole had already been notified by Maya. Military officials were on their way. What had begun as a routine traffic stop on a rainy Virginia highway was no longer confined to a single patrol officer or a single police department. The truth had entered the conversation, and once it arrived, no assumption could outrun it. Captain Laura Mitchell arrived with the calm urgency that only years of leadership could produce. The moment she stepped onto the rain-soaked shoulder, she surveyed the scene without rushing to conclusions. Her eyes moved from Officer Ryan Mercer to the second patrol officer, then finally to Danielle Brooks, who remained remarkably composed despite everything that had unfolded. Medical personnel carefully approached and began providing assistance, while speaking in steady, reassuring voices. Danielle answered every question clearly, never raising her voice, never allowing frustration to replace discipline. Captain Mitchell looked toward Ryan. "Holster your weapon and step back from the vehicle." There was no anger in her tone, only authority. For the first time that evening, Ryan obeyed an instruction without hesitation. His shoulders seemed heavier than before as he slowly moved away from the driver's door. The younger officer quietly secured the scene while additional supervisors arrived one after another. Across the highway, Noah Reed remained exactly where he had been standing since the encounter began. One of the supervisors noticed the phone still in his hand and politely asked whether he had recorded any part of the incident. Noah nodded. "I started recording because something did not feel right. I never expected any of this." The supervisor thanked him and requested that the video be preserved as evidence. No one argued. No one attempted to dismiss what he had seen. Inside the sport utility vehicle, Danielle watched the activity around her with thoughtful eyes. She had participated in countless investigations during her military career. She understood that facts mattered more than emotions, and that every detail would eventually find its proper place. Captain Mitchell approached the driver's window. "Colonel Brooks, I am Captain Laura Mitchell. I want you to know that this incident will receive a complete and independent review." Danielle studied her for a brief moment before responding. "Captain, I appreciate those words. Please make certain the review focuses on every decision made tonight, not only the final one. Problems like this rarely begin with a single moment." Mitchell slowly nodded. She understood exactly what Danielle meant. The misunderstanding had not appeared suddenly. It had grown step by step through assumptions, conflicting commands, and missed opportunities to slow the situation down. Moments later, several dark government vehicles entered the highway shoulder. Major Ethan Cole stepped out before the engines had fully stopped. His uniform was immaculate despite the rain, but his expression reflected deep concern rather than rank. He walked directly toward Danielle, speaking first to the medical team before kneeling beside her. "Colonel, we are here." Danielle offered a faint, reassuring smile. "I knew you would be." Ethan looked toward Captain Mitchell and extended a professional handshake. "Our priority is cooperation. We want every fact documented exactly as it occurred." Mitchell answered immediately. "You have my word." Ryan listened from several yards away, hearing every sentence. No one was shouting. No one was seeking revenge. The conversation centered entirely on truth, accountability, and procedure. That realization unsettled him more than any accusation could have. Then another supervisor approached Captain Mitchell, carrying preliminary information from dispatch. "Captain, there is something else." Internal Affairs has already located multiple previous complaints involving similar traffic stops connected to Officer Mercer. They are requesting every available recording from tonight. Mitchell looked toward the flashing patrol lights reflected across the wet pavement and quietly understood that the investigation had just expanded far beyond a single rainy evening. The truth was no longer asking for attention. It was demanding it. 6 weeks later, the rain had long disappeared, but the questions from that night had not. The city council chamber was filled with community members, veterans, police officers, reporters, and families who wanted to understand how an ordinary traffic stop had become the subject of a statewide investigation. Every available seat had been taken long before the hearing began. Officer Ryan Mercer sat quietly with his attorney several rows behind department leadership. The confidence that had once defined his posture had been replaced by reflection as investigators presented a careful timeline built from dispatch records, dashboard camera footage, witness statements, and Noah Reed's video. Each piece of evidence confirmed the same pattern. Danielle Brooks had remained respectful, announced her movements, requested clear instructions, and repeatedly attempted to reduce confusion. Captain Laura Mitchell had already acknowledged publicly that leadership carried responsibility whenever warning signs were ignored. Internal Affairs confirmed that earlier complaints involving Ryan had not received the level of review they deserved, leading the department to implement new training standards, stronger supervision during traffic stops, and clearer communication procedures designed to prevent similar failures. When Colonel Danielle Brooks entered the chamber wearing her Army service uniform, the room became completely silent. Her decorations reflected years of service, but she did not stand before the audience to speak about rank, accomplishments, or authority. Instead, she carried a small notebook containing names. She looked across the room before opening it. "These are the names of people who believed nobody would ever listen to them," she said with quiet conviction. Some filed complaints. Some stayed silent because they thought nothing would change. Tonight is not about proving that I mattered. It is about proving that every one of them mattered too. The room remained still as she continued. "My uniform did not make my life valuable. It simply made it harder for the truth to be ignored. Justice cannot depend upon someone's profession, title, neighborhood, or the color of their skin. If fairness only arrives after a person becomes important, then fairness has already failed." No applause interrupted her words because no applause was necessary. The weight of the truth spoke louder than any reaction. Captain Mitchell announced a series of policy reforms, expanded officer training focused on communication and de-escalation, mandatory supervisory review for certain traffic stops, and an independent process for examining citizen complaints. Major Ethan Cole later thanked the department for choosing transparency over defensiveness, reminding everyone that trust between institutions and communities could only grow when accountability was accepted rather than avoided. As people slowly left the chamber, Ryan remained, seated for several moments, listening to conversations that no longer centered on blame alone, but on responsibility and change. He finally understood that authority without humility could never earn lasting respect. Outside, the evening sky was clear for the first time in days. Danielle walked toward the parking lot beside Maya, who quietly slipped her hand into her mother's. Neither of them spoke for several steps because some victories arrived without celebration. They arrived as quiet promises that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. He believed a badge gave him the right to decide who deserved trust. She proved that character speaks long before titles do. He thought her rank brought justice to the highway that night. The truth was simpler than that. Justice arrived because the truth refused to stay hidden, and once the truth began to speak, every assumption finally had to listen.